Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I want to respectfully acknowledge that I live and I work on the treaty and traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe in what is now known as Peterborough in Ontario, which is about an hour and a half north of Toronto, northeast of Toronto. I offer my gratitude to the First Peoples for their care for and teachings about our earth and our relations, and I hope in my work that I can do my part in honoring those teachings. I want to give some thank yous, first of course to Natasha and Rhonda for inviting me and for their great communication throughout this whole process, including up till 1 minute ago, and their warm welcomes and hospitality. I want to thank Dewey Jones and Ron Black and their team at Abbeyfield Lakefield for inviting me to be involved in many ways over the last year in their vision to develop an Abbeyfield house in Lakefield, Ontario, which is just a few minutes north of Trent University where I work and essentially live. And we will hear from Ron shortly as well. And I want to thank everyone in the audience for the work you do to support older adults. This is critically important work, and though since COVID, the spotlight is suddenly upon older people and the inequities in supporting them and in those who provide care and support. But the significant value of your work, as you know, is nothing new. So thank you for what you do and for taking time out of your busy days to listen to my presentation. Most of what I'm presenting, I have to say, will probably not be new to you, given your fundamental roles on the ground in our communities and with our aging population. However, I'm hopeful that you might hear something that resonates with you. And just before I flip, I titled my talk Aging at Home, and I didn't have quite the right picture, so I asked my little 5-year-old who I left at home to draw me a picture. So, thanks. So that's her and I in front of our home. So I come from Trent University, and myself and my collaborator there, Dr. Mark Skinner, we've established the Rural Aging Research Program. And Peterborough is home to one of Canada's oldest communities in which our research is entirely situated and intertwined. And our research program aims to create new knowledge, collaborations, and capacity that's aimed at better understanding and informing how rural communities are responding to population aging. And you can see we have a wonderful team of early career researchers and students as well that help us in everything that we do. And thank you, of course, to the many collaborators and funders that allow us to do our work, who are shown at the bottom there. So today I'm going to talk about 5 things. I've got 5 points I want to talk about. And so the first one is aging in place, a term that will not be new to you, but I want to unpack that a little bit from the perspective of the academic and peer-reviewed literature. I want to talk about housing alternatives for older adults, a little highlight on the collaboration between Abbeyfield, Lakefield, and Trent University to give you some thoughts about how a similar relationship might work in your community, or maybe already does. I want to talk about my research on sustainable community-based program for older adults. And lastly, I want to talk about intergenerational connections and thinking about, is there a home for this in the Abbeyfield model? So I'd like to begin by situating much of my work and my thinking to the rural context. So rural communities and small towns, but also urban centers, so cities, that may be urban, but are having to become increasingly rural serving, right? So we talk a lot in our research about rural serving urban centers. So especially given that the challenges and opportunities with respect to aging faced by rural are not always unique to rural, I'm hopeful that wherever you live and wherever your Abbeyfield home is or will be, you will draw applicability to much of this discussion in the urban context as well. So when we think about aging in place, that term, it can be idealistic, idyllic even. So when you think about rural aging in rural places, you think about idealized images of a pastoral milieu, including deeply entrenched informal social supports, and that might be what you think of. But the reality is that rural places are often very different from this sentimental view. Rapidly aging rural populations, alongside population outmigration of younger people, has complicated service delivery, and significant economic restructuring has followed. So for many older people, the lack of accessible services may be the delineating factor between being stuck in place or aging in place, which I will consider shortly. Often, multiple elements of marginalization facilitate the demarcation zone between these polar opposites, with intersectionality further limiting vulnerable older people from aging in place. Amplified in rural spaces, but experienced in urban centers, of course, too, the downsizing of social and health services that support community-dwelling older people has transferred the burden of service delivery onto municipalities, who are often facing a shrinking taxation base, and volunteers, many of whom are themselves older. Fragmented social infrastructure that complicates service delivery has happened, which is crucial for older people. And so as a result, housing has been critically undermined by the limits to service delivery, complicating how people age. Safe, affordable, and appropriate housing for older people is what underpins the spirit of aging in place. So today, I aim to describe a vision for the future of alternative housing arrangements and its importance for conceptualizing the experiences of aging. Aging in place. So, given the choice, most people would prefer to age in their own homes or their communities, and limited public sector budgets may favor the presumed cost-saving measures associated with people indefinitely living at home. So we hear the concept of aging in place talked about quite often. Aging in place, which is essentially the avoidance of institutional care, pervades the healthy aging literature that I work within and relevant public policy. Simple changes such as introducing a ramp, a handle in the shower, or a walker may help to initially support this goal. However, of course, aging in place extends far beyond home modifications and must also consider house and property infrastructure, especially health and social care work in the home. And that, as you know, is usually the most underfunded branch of healthcare. There's ambiguity in the term aging in place. A person aging at home in a home that meets their own physical needs may be set in a neighborhood that no longer does. Place attachment is complex and multifaceted. Strong personal importance may be placed upon a community that once supported individual needs. So I like to conceptualize the opposite of this as stuck in place. So optimistic views on aging may fail to consider that just below the surface of that rural idealism that I talked about may linger realities of stuck in place, wherein older adults needing to relocate are often constrained by economic, social, and/or racial disparities and cannot relocate. Indeed, there are disparities and tensions between these concepts of aging in place, which is sort of something to strive to, I guess, or being stuck in place, something to avoid. So my colleagues have outlined a double jeopardy tension between youth outmigration, so younger and middle-aged people sort of leaving, and the growing care needs of the older people who remain. Expanding this to a triple jeopardy, researchers have added the loss of informal social networks that traditionally supported older people's needs. So the closures of social community services such as senior centers, grocery stores, post offices, and places of worship that for generations supported a consistent social backdrop for community may today reinforce this triarchic challenge. Aging in place is a very well-documented preference for older people and their families. So when you ask people, where would you like to grow older, the answer is usually their homes, and has significant health and wellness benefits when well facilitated, so it is a good thing. However, this seemingly affordable and desirable concept may also be idealized and somewhat naive, given that functioning services are absolutely critical to effectively supporting aging in place. So, services for an aging population. Rural places may lack the population to support the range of public services usually provided by federal or provincial governments. So think about community, social, health, and education services. And urban centers, as you know, are not immune to this either. As I said, municipalities must draw on shrinking tax bases and may be unable to provide current and adequately made infrastructure supported by dwindling pools of health professionals and volunteers, so it's hard to find people sometimes. To pick up the slack in government service provision, responsibility then, as you know, falls to the shoulders of families and individuals and people in the voluntary sector to find ways to provide required services for rural older adults and those in small towns as well. You might find this a familiar concept, as this would include, of course, Abbeyfields. Voluntarism can facilitate community sustainability and development and can be transformative for the individual volunteer. People like contributing. However, precarity often overwhelms the voluntary sector, as older people mostly comprise the pool of volunteers providing services to aging residents, something I'm sure you're very familiar with. And this is a phenomenon referred to my friend and colleague Mark Skinner as older volunteerism. So if you're interested in that, there's a whole literature about that to read. So for example, my favorite example that I hear everywhere I go is imagine a 90-year-old volunteer delivering food through a Meals on Wheels program to their 85-year-old neighbor. I have heard this specific example many times, and really it exemplifies the peer-to-peer support that is often required just to maintain some level of service. As a result, the sustainability of aging communities and their ability to provide environments that support aging in place is a focal question. It is likely that a balance between aging in place, more possible within well-serviced communities, and being stuck in place, more likely in precariously serviced communities, will increasingly tip in the favor of isolation. Among the many services that have receded, housing has emerged as a primary factor determining the everyday experience of growing older in place. And so that brings us to housing alternatives for older adults, which, as you know, are key in supporting aging in place is safe, supportive, and affordable housing. So according to the World Health Organization, this is housing that is affordable and safe, that can be structurally adapted, and is close to essential services. So in Canada, there is a growing and major gap in housing alternatives for lower and middle income Canadians who cannot age in place, move into retirement homes, or other forms of supportive residences, or who would require long-term care. Building long-term care homes and other institutional arrangements is prohibitively costly, and all-encompassing care is actually typically unnecessary until a person reaches their final years, if ever. Rural Canadians are actually twice as likely to enter long-term care when their needs could have adequately been met at home, given appropriate supports. Premature entry into the long-term care system benefits no one, resulting in significant financial stress on the system and personal stressors on the person. Further, as you know, the staffing pool is severely restricted, resulting in recurrent understaffing challenges. And simply injecting funds into housing services is not going to solve the problem. Without infrastructure to implement housing programs, funds are one of only many steps in providing an environment that is conducive to aging in place. So given individual people have very unique housing needs, everyone needs something different, the contextual differences across individual rural communities, and the differences in funding and oversight, it is not surprising that a variety of wonderful models have been developed. So housing models have been developed by governments, community groups, private citizens, so just people like you, and other social institutions, such as universities, for example, with a community-based research focus. And while there are commonalities across these different models, most are one of a kind in terms of implementation, considering the needs of their individual local populations. Most are grassroots in terms of funding, so often seeking donations that are significant from the community and government grants, which takes work, right? Grant writing is a lot. Development and implementation, and are led by volunteers largely. Excluding retirement homes and assisted living models, housing alternatives for older people can be roughly divided into two categories: community support models and home sharing models, which I'm going to focus on now. So here's some people, some of you might actually know, who are residents at the Abbeyfield that I visited in Caledon, Ontario. So home sharing, including Abbeyfields, connects unrelated people of any age that cohabitate in an environment typical of family living in a non-institutional building, such as a house, that includes both private and common space and shared decision-making. So many models have been formally and informally created, but most involve the exchange of rental income or agreed upon service provision between parties. Home sharing can and does exist informally between private citizens, but centralized home sharing organizations are becoming a common conduit, such as Abbeyfield, for facilitating and streamlining the logistics and legalities surrounding home sharing for older people. Regardless of the many modes of operation, rural home sharing is infrequently implemented and suffers from serious sustainability challenges, which I know many of you talked about last night. Home sharing addresses practical limitations of housing for older adults, and it does provide benefits of social connectivity among people. When we're connected, we're better. Critical to their success, home sharing models are often facilitated through an external agency where a paid position is responsible for making the matches, and then the organization carries the liability. So as you know, home sharing is not a new model, but has been implemented almost exclusively on a small scale, often as pilot projects. And I think Abbeyfield is kind of unique in that it's sort of moved beyond that in many ways. Further, there are significant municipal barriers such as zoning laws, which you will be totally familiar with, to implementing home sharing on a wider scale. So as a result, unfortunately, despite all the incredible benefits that I'm aware of in the literature and you know from your actual experience, home sharing is actually pretty limited given its prevalence in general, and especially in rural spaces where it's needed. Despite this, research has documented important outcomes for older people living in home sharing arrangements, including increasing independence and improved functional capacity to complete activities of daily living, and the ability of home sharing to still enable aging in place for people who may be struggling economically and may not own their own home. So, as an example, I'd like to switch now to the collaboration between Abbeyfield Lakefield, which the future houses are pictured right here, and Trent University, where I'm lucky enough to work. So as you can see, the literature more broadly behind home sharing really supports the model such as Abbeyfield. And so given this, I, as a professor, became interested in supporting the development of home sharing arrangements in my community to support older adults wishing to age in place. Perhaps not in their own homes, but in their community. So it's a community-university collaboration, and I invite you to think about how this might potentially work within your own community. So in 2018, some of my students and I worked with Abbeyfield Lakefield. We conducted a needs, so there's some pictures of my students, and there's me talking like I always am in front of people. And we conducted this needs assessment to determine interest in establishing an Abbeyfield home. So really creating a fundamental report that showed that people wanted to do this. And that was at the time led by community leader Dewey Jones, with the cause since taken up by Ron. So we created this community research report. I look at that, I feel it's a lifetime ago that we made it, with my students, and you can access that online if you'd like. We also have a peer-reviewed publication that the students wrote based on the same literature. And I want to share 3 quotations that come from that report about affordability, independence, and community. So affordability, I think the main thing is your finances. When you get to be at that stage, you are looking at your finances and thinking about what can you afford, where can you afford to live, and for how long. And in terms of independence, being somewhere within the village is a really important thing. So walkability is key. And community. Once you start integrating into a community, you don't want to do that all over again somewhere else. So this is the aging in place outside of one's home, but in their community. You've already got a doctor, a dentist, and you want to be able to retire somewhere. You're not looking for that over and over again. And then another person said, if you are a part of your community, your health improves. And as a output of this collaboration, we started making videos during the pandemic to try to find a way to share our research. And one of those things we wanted to do was find a way to amplify the work being done by Abbeyfield Lakefield, in part to sort of help give them a piece of evidence beyond the report that we created to support, their next steps in that. So I'm going to show that video now. Home is usually talked about as the best place to grow older. However, what about when it's not? That's where unique alternatives to housing for older people comes in. Abbeyfield Housing is a unique home sharing arrangement wherein older people live together in a small communal housing environment, usually in a house, facilitated by a non-profit organization. Just north of Trent University in Lakefield, Ontario, the Abbeyfield House Society of Lakefield has been working to establish an Abbeyfield house, and this video documents the process that they've undergone to this point.
Seniors are lonely, they need company, and yet in a large establishment, it's not quite as simple as making friends in a smaller, say, 14 to 16 unit establishment, a house.
We were very fortunate to have a relationship with Trent University, Trent Center for Aging and Society, and their psychology department, who provided students to do a needs assessment for the Abbeyfield and Lakefield. The assessment came out very positive. The document was well received and was great support for our project moving forward.
One of our big successes this year, and I think that's securing government funding for the project from CMHC. Albeit we're at a seed funding stage, but we've clearly got their interest and went through a fairly extensive vetting process to secure funding, and I think it's really necessary for us to move this forward.
Yeah, it's going to be great for the community. There is no question.
Acquiring of a property in Lakefield that is going to be the future home of our Abbeyfield house, And that happened because we reached out and did a presentation to our municipality, and someone saw that and believed so much in what we were doing, they came to us and said, hey, we might have a property you want to look at. Aging is certainly something that we're all experiencing. Everybody's living longer, and I think we all know that aging at home is the best scenario. But if you can't age at home, you should at least be able to age in your community. And I think that is what Abbeyfield provides, and I think every community should have an Abbeyfield.
I traveled to the Abbeyfield home in Caledon, Ontario, which has been established for a number of years. It's a modern, efficiently run, 12-resident, purpose-built structure that provides a warm and homey environment, just like living in a house with your friends. Residents were happy to share with me about how special of a place it is to live, often reflecting both on the value of maintaining their independence, but also how beneficial they found the social element of shared housing. Some had lived there for a while, and others were fairly new, but overall there was a sense of ease and comfortability that comes with family living. Research consistently shows that older people find the most benefit from peer socialization, and this was truly reflected in my visit, and every single person mentioned the wonderful meals. I spoke with a staff person and a board member at Abbeyfield Canada about their experiences with developing and running an Abbeyfield house, and I chatted with the residents about how it works for them in their day-to-day lives.
It is like a family, because if you are not satisfied with what's going on around you, when the people are, you can go off and do your own thing. That's what I like about it. You have your privacy if you want it. It's there.
I've enjoyed it because I can drive. I do drive. I'm always whipping into the stores here, getting this and getting that, you know, and it's so local.
They say it takes a community to raise a kid, like not just a family. And I think it's sort of
For me, it's like living at home. I do my own laundry, I do my own ironing. Fortunately, I bought an iron board with me and an iron.
In 2019, we became incorporated as a not-for-profit housing organization without shared capital. And then at the same time, we also got our CRA charitable status to move forward so we could accept donations. There isn't a lot of support out there through municipalities or any other level of government to purchase the property. Once you purchase the property, there are a number of programs and grants that help you through it, but actually purchasing the property is probably the biggest challenge for any organization.
Ron Black and I walked on the property where the Abbeyfield home will be in Lakefield, and I learned more about how the project will unfold. So what's happening next with this street frontage?
Well, the whole property is about 4 acres, and we'll end up with about 3.5 acres left after we sever off the house and sell the house. We need the revenue from the sale of the house to help support our portion of the project. So the property is actually about 275 feet wide and about 800 feet deep. In the center of it is an environmentally sensitive area that we worked with ORCA to determine setbacks to protect it, and actually we're going to add local species to it to help secure it and help with the drainage and that sort of thing from the property. So our Abbeyfield house will be built on the back half of the 800 feet, so in around the 400-foot area. There is a very nice cedar bush in the back and a stream. So our plan is really to take the property and have walking paths, level walking paths around the property, around the environmentally sensitive areas, as well through the wooded area and to the stream in the back, and then back around. Yeah, it's really a balance between maintaining your independence while providing some opportunity for companionship, some opportunities to participate in the community, more so than maybe in a retirement home or obviously long-term care. So that's really, some of the key things that attracts people to an Abbeyfield.
Older people's health and well-being benefits from aging in their own communities. The Abbeyfield House Society of Lakefield has done their part to support the housing needs of older residents in Lakefield, and we look forward to seeing the next steps of this project.
there. So you can, you like it? My dad helped me make that video.
No pressure.
I had a brand new baby during the pandemic, so there was a third person. It was a whole family effort. So we'll hear more from Ron about, I think, some of those specific challenges to implementation from an updated perspective as well. But before that, I want to take a step back and share some of the barriers that may prevent and the factors that may support sustainable community-based programs for older adults. And this is especially grounded in my research on rural age-friendly communities. So you've probably heard that term a lot, age-friendly communities, which is a really good way to, I think, couch the work of Abbeyfield within a broader policy. The aim here is to demonstrate that the barriers you may be facing, and the positives as well, are not unique to grassroots co-housing, but are endemic to the development and implementation of community-based programs for older adults. So age-friendly communities are those that are more accessible to and inclusive of their aging population. And building sustainable age-friendly communities has been a primary focus of my research for about 15 years. So what this is how to support the creation of a strong link between the early stages of development and the long-term viability of programs, kind of like a 40-year-old Abbeyfield program, right? The same idea, ultimately to have the positive effects for older people that we're seeking. So from this, my work has evolved to seek understanding how age-friendly programs, and indeed the structure of age-friendly policy itself, might even exclude some older adults. And so to understand some of these barriers that may prevent and factors that may support sustainable age-friendly programs, between 2014 and 2020, we interviewed 102 age-friendly program coordinators, community members, volunteers, and older program participants themselves in 16 communities in Newfoundland and Labrador and in Ontario. We drove literally tens of thousands of kilometers in all seasons and talked to all kinds of people in every rural setting you can imagine. We met so many amazing community leaders and older adults who were really eager to show us what growing older and supporting those who were doing so was like in their individual community. So that's us traveling around. My research assistant Amber and I really got to know each other over those many trips. And so the key finding was that there was and is significant uncertainty for program sustainability. So we found this significant uncertainty, and I'm going to just show you quickly a few quotes to support this. And I want to do this to make you feel okay about some of the struggles that you're facing. You know, it's nice to know that there's strength in numbers, right? And I will end on a positive. We've established that capacity issues are significant between early development, so that's almost the easy part, and then long-term. So few volunteers, right? We're relying on volunteers like you. Limited capacity equals burnout. So someone said you cannot push volunteers for 40 hours a week. Research has demonstrated that there are challenges of limited finances, capacity, and scope, which has also ultimately resulted in many age-friendly programs being kind of small in their capacity. So all this saying about housing, transportation, and isolation, a good attempt has been made, but solve the problem, a big no. So just in terms of this, like we're seeing so many age-friendly programs that are hearing that housing and also transportation is a major, major problem, but it's just something that is too much for these age-friendly programs to address. So this is where something like Abbeyfield can come in and really fill that gap with its own programming structures that do exist. However, we've also found that overall, sustainable community-based programs for older adults relies on connectedness, collaboration, and community. So although we did talk to lots of programs that actually stopped, that don't exist anymore, they were not sustainable, we talked to many that are. So the good news here is that rural and small towns age-friendly sustainability is actually possible, and Abbeyfield is a great example of that. So we found 3 primary factors that support rural age-friendly sustainability, and those would certainly apply to Abbeyfield as well. And one is social connectivity. So they talk really about how sustainable programs experience implementation challenges, but yet reported that the pre-existing sense of community and streamlined partnership development was really helpful in confronting those challenges. So I'll read the second quote. Certainly, it's helped us identify with the community. It's helped us gather volunteers, fundraising dollars, and serve the community. And this slide is about you, community champions. The reliance on individual community champions, so single people usually per location, may be precarious and unrealistically place responsibility on one person or a small group of people who are often retired, so themselves older. It really does appear critical in the early stages of this work. So really, given this risk, the challenge lies in seeking new champions and new people in a committee, which is really helpful in anticipating and buffering turnover. So this program was driven by community champions. It floundered when a council member implemented it. It was on the side of her desk, right? So that's the thing where money can't necessarily solve everything, although it's pretty good. Cross-sector collaborations and municipal integration. We found that bringing diverse and various perspectives within collaborations across different organizations that serve older adults to the table was really important in allowing age-friendly programs to tackle the different elements of planning. And this also includes municipal integration. Those that were not able to become integrated in their municipality typically didn't last. So really growing and then also maintaining municipal connectivity was really directly related to the success and sustainability of initiatives. So this may ring true for yourselves as well. So she said here, no council would turn down funding, but it can't be seen that way, just as money that the government wants to interject. They aren't seeing it as an ongoing integral part of community development. So trying a way to make that so is really significant. So ultimately, we know that sustainable community-based programs, which include Abbeyfields, are really key to facilitating aging in place and not reinforcing stuck in place. And quickly, lastly, I want you to think about intergenerational connections, and is there a home in an Abbeyfield? And this picture is from an intergenerational classroom, a psychology of aging classroom that I teach at Trent University. So as a professor, I wondered, so I just want you to think about how could this be applied to Abbeyfield. I wondered, do universities have a social role, maybe obligation to play in reducing ageism? And so I did some research that established that age-based equity, so really good understanding between generations, can happen just in a typical lecture-based classroom. I did that a few years ago. So students that actually just sit and listen to me talk for 12 weeks about aging, which to me sounds pretty boring, but to them, they had a deeper understanding of the aging process, a reduction in and increased awareness of ageism, and enhanced personal connection with aging. So they really felt connected with aging, though they didn't interact with older adults. So then I asked myself, when I found that over the course of a couple of research studies, well, what if the class was intergenerational? And those pictures are from my intergenerational classroom. So just very quickly, in 2024, we implemented an intergenerational classroom. It was in a third-year psychology of aging course at Trent. We had 60 students, so this wasn't one of those little small seminars. This was a big feat to take on. And we had 13 community participants, and they were all 65 plus. And the course composition was formal and informal, so we just had those same regular lectures, but we fit in really exciting indoor and outdoor activities with older adults every single week. And we even had to fit in an informal gathering after class that was optional because we couldn't get people to stop talking with each other, which was really great. And I mean people across generations, and they were not talking about the lecture content. They were talking about, what are you doing this weekend? And just like all the exciting things that regular people talk about. So it was really exciting to see that transfer of just not knowledge so much, but just understanding across generations in my classroom. And as you can see, we created 2 reports. So we're always about creating outputs of our research. So we created a report that profiles the research findings on the left there, challenging ageism and supporting equity, which is what we were hoping to do. And also a toolkit for developing and implementing an intergenerational classroom. If other faculty members want to implement such a thing, we now have a resource for that. And so just briefly, before I sum up my talk, these are our key research findings, and as you can see, those are pictures from the classroom. Trent University, we're so lucky to have such a beautiful campus space. And that picture on the top, I think it's my favorite because I had to stand on a chair because everyone was so excited and I'm so short, and it was just like the vibrancy of the room is exemplified there. And that's Judy giving a little speech about her thing, and it was just such a wonderful thing. So from a research perspective, we always embed research when we do our community-based work, just to make sure we have that evidence that I was able to share with you today, for example. We found that the intergenerational classroom facilitated the development of age-based equity, reduced perceived generational divides, and humanized people of all ages. So a student participant said, this course was the first time that I ever heard that word, ageism, which I think kind of goes to show about the progress and the learning that I had made about that. A community participant said, I'm not so worried that these are the folks that are going to look after us now when we're old now.
No pressure.
In terms of reducing perceived generational divides, I think in sharing some of my experiences and them sharing back, you realize the common denominators. So people just started to realize that whether you're 22 or 67, we're all just sort of people. And a student said, I feel more open to talking with older adults, and I realize how beneficial it is now. And I'm going to wrap up my talk. But before I do that, I want to give you an example of an activity we did. They gave us all such renewed hope for the future, is what a community participant said. And that was really special to me. And one of the moment that I realized that we had facilitated intergenerational contact and people just saw each other as people, I did an activity that was just, it was a what's that called when you bring things in? It was a show and tell. I base all my activities off of preschool. It works every time. People just love it. And so I said, just bring in an item or a picture of an item that represents you, and whatever that is, doesn't matter. And they all brought in the same things. They all brought in little things from their lives, and think about in your head what you would bring in that just represented a person in their lives that was special, a time, a transformational time in their lives, or a goal for the future. And it didn't matter what age they were. And that was the moment when they were in sharing circles, sharing these objects and talking about it, that I realized, not that everybody was sort of the same, but that they got it, that they got that point, and that was special for me. And so I'm hoping I can share in this, that I think that's something that might fit in an Abbeyfield space as well. So intergenerational connections were a transformational way to develop age-based equity. So just think to yourself, how can this maybe be embedded within the Abbeyfield model? Because I really think there's a space. Before I kind of thought there was, and now I know there is. So the key take-home point of my talk today, aging in place is ideal, but also idealized. And perhaps we might instead consider something like aging at home, like the picture I had on my first slide. But to do so, we must collaborate, advocate, and, above all, engage with older people, with our residents in the homes at every single stage. Thank you.